Can you
Good, sure.
can you situate the construction of Dodger Stadium within that transitional period?
Well, the whole effort to bring the Dodgers to Los Angeles and construct a stadium for them was tied up with a growing sense in Los Angeles, starting really in the late 1940s, that it was time for the city to reach its next stage of development. Just prior to World War II and during the war, Los Angeles filled up with an extraordinary amount of talented people, emigres from Europe and elsewhere. You plus had an enormous amount, well over 2 million young Americans being trained here for the Navy, for the Army Air Corps, Marine Corps. In fact, on weekdays in Los Angeles, you might have 20, or weekends rather, on Los Angeles, you might have, I'll say that again. In fact, on weekends in Los Angeles during World War II, you might have 25,000 soldiers, sailors, Marines, airmen on leave in the city. So the city began to have a different sense of itself. It was really the headquarters for the Gibraltar of the Pacific, because all of Southern California was hyped up and expanded in terms of the aircraft industry, in terms of shipbuilding industry, in terms of training. And that gave Los Angeles a different sense of itself when the war ended. Now, there was a crisis period after the war, 46, 47, 48, when Los Angeles sort of floundered around looking for a new identity. And that's the Los Angeles of Mickey Cohen and gangsters and film noir Los Angeles, the LA noir Los Angeles. You can see the anxiety about the identity of the city in those films. By the 1950s, however, especially by the mid-1950s, 53, 54, as we begin to move mid-decade, there was a growing sense that Los Angeles had to upgrade its civic institutions. If it had a good minor league Pacific Coast baseball team, it needed a major league team. If it had a couple regional theater groups, it needed to upgrade its theater presentation. It was proud of its symphony orchestra, which had developed during the war, just before the war and during the war, and after, with Bruno Walter, it wanted to upgrade its symphony. It had the culture of the Hollywood Bowl. The Hollywood Bowl almost went bankrupt in 1950-51, and that gave concentration to the movement headed by Dorothy Buffum Chandler for a music center, which really took place throughout the entire 1950s decade. Also, you have programs like Dragnet, Jack Webb's Dragnet, sponsored by Chief Parker, the chief of police, which showcased the city to a national audience. So there was this, everywhere you look, there was this sense that, what's the next stage for Los Angeles? When do we become something more than just a regional capital? And when do we become something more than just a film capital, as important as that is? When do we become a major American or even a major global city? When do we become big league? Now, to become big league, what's the best way to become big league was to join the big leagues. And of course, the big leagues, the major leagues, had stayed outside of the West Coast, although there had been discussions of that, of the major leagues coming in an earlier period. I think the success of the Los Angeles Rams playing in the Coliseum, professional football coming, the good crowds of the Los Angeles Rams began to develop, and the popularity of the Rams as a way of symbolizing the city gave rise even further impetus to the effort to bring Major League Baseball to the city. There was also the issue of what was going on in Brooklyn. The Dodgers were for a number of years looking for either a better a venue or certainly a better stadium, but certainly out of the kind of debilitations that they were experiencing in the Polo Grounds, which dated back to the pre-World War I period. So we began to have a sense of waning on the East Coast and a sense of rising on the West Coast that gave rise to the negotiations. Now, they were spearheaded by Mayor Paulson. He spearheaded them, but the power behind the throne, and she was barely in her early 20s, 22, 23, was City Councilwoman Roz Wyman, who fastened on to this idea of a major league team coming to Los Angeles, making Los Angeles officially a major league city. Now, that runs in conflict with another side of Los Angeles, what should we call it, the progressive side, the left liberal side. After all, the mobilizations of World War II, especially in the housing field, building, for instance, housing for the workers, defense workers at Channel Island and San Pedro area, designed by Richard Neutra. It gave rise among architects to the concept of public housing. And the Elysian Park program that was designed by Neutra and Alexandria was a proposal before the city to create really a vast subsidized housing for the emergent populations of the city. Emergent, of course, meaning Latino, Mexican American, African American, and emergent whites who had perhaps come to Los Angeles in the 1930s from the Dust Bowl states, etc., and now wanted to ascend up into a better lifestyle, and experienced, in fact, that better lifestyle during World War II when they were working in the defense industries. That came a cropper, however, on the whole question of the Red Scare in the early 1950s. Remember now that the whole Red Scare, we tend to think of it in the hands of Joe McCarthy and Wisconsin, or a Wisconsin figure. The whole Red Scare came before the American people in a big way in the late 1940s, 47, 48, 49, from the point of view of infiltration in Hollywood. And of course the Hollywood 10 in 47, appearing before the House Un-American Activities Committee, their sentencing to a number of them to a year in prison for refusing to testify. The fact that Bertolt Brecht testified and then that night got on an airplane for Europe and was never seen again. Figures like John Howard Lawson, very outspoken screen director on the far left, and all of this showcased communist infiltration of alleged communist infiltration in the motion pictures. I say alleged because it wasn't as widespread as you think, but it was there. You can read testimony by people like young Bud Schulberg, etc., who ran in some of these circles. In fact, joined the Communist Party briefly because the parties they gave had the most pretty girls. That's where he said he became a communist. They gave the best parties. But all of that had been put on hold during World War II because, after all, we were allies with the Soviet Union, and there was not a percentage in any way, shape, or form of being anti-communist or of castigating them. But once the Iron Curtain came down in 47, 48, all across Europe, once the Truman Doctrine was declared regarding Greece, that communism would not spread any further now, allowed to spread any further into Europe, all that began to give rise to what we call the Red Scare. McCarthy played a very important role, but McCarthy's accusations initially were not so much the film industry as they were China, who was responsible for the fall of China in 1949, the loss of China to Mao Zedong and the Communist Party. So it began to build in Los Angeles in a very big way, 50, 51, 52. It was fanned by Joseph Tenney, the State Senate Committee of House Un-American Activities, was fanned by the Los Angeles Times, which is part of the ethos, part of the gestalt, part of the mood of the times. Now, obviously, it's very difficult if you're proposing a tremendous public housing development, and behind that public housing development was not necessarily housing as for just the welfare class. This was council housing, like Great Britain had decided. Great Britain had decided years earlier that housing was really beyond, good housing was really beyond the ability of a significant percentage of the population to pay. And so consequently, the government had to step in to help.